Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, cut off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
What you know, good Ann Camp? You're listening to the Ann Campaign's Church Politics Podcast with Justin Giboney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson. And the first thing I want to do on this, the second episode of 2025, is I want to give a shout out to all those Christians who are doing the Daniel fast right now. I know a lot of churches and organizations, shout out to King and Chris Bouchard and all those cats. I know a lot of y'all set aside January to do the Daniel fast. And so whoever's going through the Daniel fast right now, you eating those nuts and berries and natural juices and all that stuff, I want to say shout out to you. Stay strong, and I really do hope that you grow spiritually from this experience. Get a lot of prayer in. It's not necessarily easy, but then again, it is easy when you think about what you're doing it for, all right? So shout out to all y'all doing that stuff. If you're anything like me, guys, you watched a lot of football during this last week. You had the college playoffs, right? So you had, Penn State getting beat by Notre Dame. You had Ohio State getting beat by, Texas getting beat by Ohio State. So those were good games. Also this weekend, got a chance to watch some NFL football because, it's all about those playoffs right now. One thing that has struck me, though, one thing that really sticks out to me is all these college football players talking about Jesus. Have y'all noticed that? It's almost like a revival going on in college football at some of these colleges. I don't know if you've seen what has been going on with the students and the players at Ohio State, but it's not getting much coverage, but it's a lot. And there have always, I think, for whatever reason, and maybe I wonder if somebody has written about this, but it's definitely worth writing about. It seems like college football is like the most religious sport. There have always been people within college football that have shouted out Jesus and had things to say about it and got in the end zone and kneeled and all those things. So that's always been going on. But right now it feels like there's even much more of it, and I welcome it. Now, as always, I hope these young men, and I have no reason to believe that they're not, but I pray that these young men are living what they're putting out there to the public. But this is big, and I always, when I'm around professional athletes and college athletes, I always tell them how much it means to Christian kids to see you on television winning the biggest game of your life, and the first thing you do is talk about Jesus. And this, let me back up a little. This hasn't just been people saying, I thank Lord Jesus. This has been people testifying and evangelizing, using their time where they could be talking about themselves or their team, talking about Jesus in a deeper way. I'm all for it. Which brings up an RIP that we have to have. Rest in peace to former Colorado University football coach Bill McCartney. If you don't know who Bill McCartney was, you should look him up. Bill McCartney, basically from what I remember growing up, so I grew up in Colorado. My favorite team growing up was the Colorado Buffs. And Bill McCartney was the guy that built that program up. When he was there, that was a legitimate program for a lot of years. But the thing that sticks out to me, even more than all the success that he had on the football field, was he was always talking about Jesus. He was always putting and glorifying Jesus and holding Jesus up in front of the nation. I want to say that he was even one of the founders of Promise Keepers. But for me as a kid who loved football growing up, Bill McCartney kind of set the stage to say, you being an athlete and your faith are intersected, that they go together, that you can use your platform as a football player for being a Christian. And he really set the tone for that. I would say even what's going on now, I don't know that there's anybody who set the stage for for what's going on in college football right now than Bill McCartney. So shout out to Bill McCartney. Played a huge role just as a kind of someone to look up to as a young kid who loved football, was a Christian, and it was amazing to see somebody like him up there talking about Jesus on his in that platform on that stage. And let's be honest, anybody who knows Boulder, the University of Colorado is not a conservative or religious space. It's a very progressive space, and he got pushback for that, but he did it anyway. So I definitely want to give a shout out to him, and I definitely wanted to point out all of these young people talking about Jesus and these young football players. I pray that it's real. I pray they're living it, and I pray that young people are seeing it and being inspired. Not just young people, but everybody. Okay, I hope y'all check that out. The other thing I got to tell you about, if you are anywhere near Atlanta, Georgia, on Monday, January 20th, you should know that Monday, January 20th is MLK Day, and it's also the inauguration. In Atlanta, the AND campaign is throwing an event. If you are anywhere near us, if you're in Birmingham, if you're in even Kentucky, if you're in Nashville, if you're in Charlotte, anywhere near us, you need to come to Atlanta and you need to join us for our MLK Day event at Ponce Presbyterian on Monday. It starts at 9 a.m. If you are anywhere near us, come join us. You will not regret it. We're going to have some speakers. We're going to have a panel, and then we're going to go out and march, because this should not be a day off. This should be a day of service, or this should be a day of putting your voice out there for those who may not have a voice. So join us this Monday, right? This next Monday, January 20th in Atlanta. I hope to see you there. All right. Now, before I get into it, you know what it is. I want to give a shout out to all my patrons and supporters for supporting me in what I do and how I do it on this podcast. There would not be an AND campaign if we didn't have people like you supporting us. So thank you. If you like the Church Politics Podcast, then you need to become a premium subscriber, right? So go to patreon.com/churchpolitics, become a premium subscriber, and you will get an extra a segment, right? So after this or before this, I always record another segment, and that's for the folks who have invested into what we're trying to do here, and we greatly appreciate them. All right? Now, you know what it is. Grab your Bible, get your mind right, and prepare to think not like a Republican, not like a Democrat, but like a Christian. And I want to start off with Psalm 118, verse 8, which says, "It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in humans." It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in humans. Real question. How are y'all doing out there? Really, and I mean honestly, how are y'all feeling? And when I say how are y'all feeling, I guess I should be saying, how are y'all feeling about the country? How are y'all feeling about your neighbors? How are you feeling, especially about the neighbors who disagree with you about politics, who disagreed with you on the last election? I want to start this episode off with an intervention. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start this episode off with an intervention because to be honest, I'm worried about some of you guys. Many of you who were praying Trump didn't win don't seem to be convalescing or recovering very well from what happened in November. I think some of you even let him ruin your holiday season. Now, I completely understand being upset. I certainly wasn't happy myself. But what concerns me is that I'm seeing this turn into bitterness with some of you. Trump and Vance and RFK are living rent-free in some of your heads, and I'm hoping that doesn't go down to your heart. I'm seeing otherwise thoughtful people embrace every theory or every conspiracy theory about what the Trump administration might do, and then completely obsessing over it as if it's guaranteed to happen. And what I'm trying to tell you now is that when you obsess over something like that, it starts to impact your spirit. When you're pulling your hair out, when you're all frowned up all the time because of what happened, when you can't even laugh at jokes anymore, that's an impact on your spirit. You mean to tell me that nothing is funny anymore? So I'm going to tell you to do something that I've told you to do before. And it starts with turning off cable news. It starts with turning away from those social media influencers who keep you in rage and focusing on something else for a little while. This is partially the reason that the AND campaign has created Civic Revival 2.0. We want you to focus on local issues. We want you to focus on teaching kids how to read. We want you to focus on fellowshipping with other believers and advocating with other believers, and not just what you feel like you lost in November. Now, I haven't said anything about this. It's the first time that I've mentioned it, but I've been noticing it and observing it for a while. But I'm really worried about my friends well, let me put it this way. I'm really worried about my friends who were never Trump Republicans. Not all of them, but a good portion of them. Because many of them seem to have taken this loss even harder than moderate Democrats. And I think we need to ask ourselves, or they need to ask themselves, why that is. Because I think that at some point, their issue with Trump became a very unhealthy rivalry. That in a way, it became a grudge, and that some seem to have lost the plot. Some are much more willing to accept and even dismiss stuff from the left than they really would have ever done before. For some of them, their dislike for Trump has caused them to go left in a lot of other ways. So much so, and this is probably the most regrettable part, so much so that I've seen a marked change in the theology of many of the people in this group. Not everybody. I got a lot of friends, but not everybody. But I've seen a marked change in the theology of some people in this group, creeping slowly away from orthodoxy, creeping slowly away from the Christian sexual ethic, putting less emphasis on the sanctity of life, because those are things that MAGA cares about. Trying to separate ourselves from one group and in turn changing who we are. Folks are letting politics trick them out of their convictions. Do you really want Donald J. Trump to have that kind of impact on you? I want you to think about it. Wasn't your initial intention to lessen his impact? Now your entire belief system, for some of you, is shifting because of the same man. As I said last week, too many people are still crashing out of it. I don't have a problem with you being upset, but at some point we have to get some perspective. And at some point, we have to seek refuge in something greater than politics. Because what I'll tell you, whether Trump won or lost, whoever was in that office was not going to save you. Now, whoever's in that office does matter. And I've talked about that over and over. And that's why I have my concerns. We got to chill out a little bit. I have one request. I have one request within this intervention. And I hope you take it that way. In these next 4 years, please do not let Trump be the center of your public witness. Your public witness has to be more than simply a response to Trump. People are depending on you to have a public witness that is so much more than a response to Trump. This is the whole opposition-centered public witness I was talking about. And I think that's part of the reason why people are finding themselves politically and even theologically in a different place, because they centered the wrong thing in their politics. Trump's going to try to do what Trump is going to try to do. You can anticipate what that might be. If you disagree with it, you should push back on what that is and look and hold folks accountable for it. But you should not let it change some of the things that is changing about a lot of people. Again, it sounds like some of you are putting your trust in men instead of taking refuge in the Lord. I'll be right back.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
And I'm back on the Church Politics Podcast, but I'm back with a special guest. That's right. I got a special guest. He's been on here before. Hopefully we'll be on here even after this. But I have one of Mays High School's finest.
That's right.
Howard University's own, Dr. Jaha Howard. What's going on, brother?
Hey, I'm feeling great. Feeling great.
Good. Well, I'm glad to have you on, man. There's been a lot going on politically, socially. I mean, it was a crazy weekend. We had the snow and we had all that stuff going on. Wow. But even during most of the week, there was some serious issues, and I want to get into. And I'm really glad to have you. I want to get into one of these very serious issues and kind of get your thoughts on it. Okay. So the first thing that I want to say is prayers go out to all the people in Los Angeles who have lost homes. And we know that a home is much more than just property, right? So we want to keep that in mind. Also, those who have lost businesses. I mean, some of these people have lost businesses that they've been building up their whole lives, right? And these things aren't going to be very easy to put back together, and we'll get into why afterwards. But also those who have lost family members. So our thoughts and prayers go out to those people for sure. But let's look at what's going on right now. So I'm sure you guys aren't living under a rock, so you know what happened. 24 people are confirmed dead from these fires. Almost 200,000 people have been evacuated. 500,000 people are without power. 40,000 acres, 40,000 have been burned, and over 12,000 structures have been destroyed. Now, Axios estimates, and this sounds like a lot, but they might be right. Axios estimates that this could be one of the 10 costliest natural disasters in global history. It certainly is the costliest in the history of the state of California. Now, Jaha, the cause isn't necessarily settled. It's not a settled matter. And it partially depends on who you ask. Some people are firmly and squarely blaming this on climate change. Others are saying that it was some other things, including a failure to remove brush. And apparently there are some environmental policies that don't allow you to move brush. But if you move the brush, apparently the fires can't move in the way that they did.
Right.
Okay. What I think all of them can agree on is that you had very powerful winds that struck after months without rain. And then maybe a little here and there, there was some arson here and there. It doesn't seem to be the primary cause, but that's at least something that they can all agree on. All right.
Yeah.
When you look at what's going on in LA, if you are, because you're a leader, you've been in government, you're a politician, you've been an elected official. What's going through your head right now about how you're going to address this and take care of the people that are going through it? If you could place yourself into that.
Man, that's a great question. If I had to place myself in a government official's head, knowing other government officials, because nobody does anything in a vacuum.
Right.
I would think, how can we first um, just try to get a stop to the problem?
Hmm.
Um, that would be how I would approach it first. Obviously, with a lot of prayer, because it's going to take a lot of wisdom to know how to get a scope of what's really going on. To your point,
Hmm.
so many
Yeah.
different narratives of what happened. We think that it's probably a combination of several of those things. But the scope of the problem is huge. And we're recording this on a Monday morning. We're still expecting more winds and more wind gusts and all those things that caused the original issue, potentially caused the original issue. So first, we're trying to get a handle of like what's the scope and how do we just get care for those that are in immediate need.
Right.
So I think that's where it starts.
So we got to stop the fires,
Got to
and we
stop
got
the
to make sure we're taking care of the people
get the
that are
people
actually
out of
going through
there
this.
and get them care and make
Yeah.
sure they are have their basic needs met. Then
Yeah.
you
No,
try
I
to
think
take
that's a good
try
answer.
to take a breath and then kind
Yeah.
of go into these next steps. But we have
Yeah.
seen opposite of that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really good answer. And it's interesting because obviously that has been covered, but I think most of the coverage that I've seen has really been about placing the blame, right?
Sure.
The conversation about the mayor being out of the country, the conversation about $18 million being cut from the fire department's budget,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
conversation about the fire department to some extent did seem ill prepared, and
Hmm.
then you have, not surprisingly, not really out of character, you have President-elect Trump, who's really pointing the finger, even calling for Governor Newsom to resign.
That's
And
right.
my thing about that, Jaha, was I believe that there will and must be some sort of reckoning. And we can look at what happened, what didn't happen, that should have happened, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But the time isn't now,
Yeah.
right? Like that, to me, that's not good leadership. And that's one of my problems with President Trump. That's not a serious response
Sure.
when the winds are still blowing and the fires are still going. I don't know if you saw it. I even saw like a fire tornado where the
Right.
winds were blowing so hard that like the fire was caught up in the
Right.
tornado and it was
Right.
moving around on the ground. Like
And,
this is
and,
crazy.
and for
I
leaders
think
to
the
think,
time to place the blame is later. And right now we should be doing exactly what you said. But go ahead.
and we have other leaders who are thinking they're looking at the situation and they do not want a crisis to go to waste politically.
Hmm.
And I think it's important as a people of God here to say, hey, what's the lens in which we are looking at all things, let alone a disaster, but especially a disaster? I think our lens really, really matters. To your point earlier, and in several podcasts, we've talked about it. If your lens is partisan, you're automatically going to look at a disaster and think, okay, first, who's in charge? Are there a Republican or a Democrat? That determines how I critique and how my commentary goes, right? Who's the opponent? How can I shut down the opponent's conversation? All of that is God-given time and energy that we're using doing the wrong thing, I think.
Right. And
So your
that's
lens
yeah.
matters.
And that's why we're missing a statesman, right? Like that's you would not see, and I wasn't a huge Bush fan, but you're not going to see Bush do that. You're not going to see Obama do that. You do see, and this is much of the complaint about Trump, you do see him push our discourse so low that that's exactly what we're worrying about. And from a practical point of view, do you really want the governor or the mayor to resign in the middle of the issue while it's still
Yeah,
going on, while the tragedy is still going on? Should they resign and then you got to go through that whole process? That's ridiculous.
yeah.
So the only reason that you could be saying it, not because it has any practical value or that's what you really want somebody to do, you're only saying it for to score political points and prove a point, and that's not what we need right now.
And while that discourse is happening, we're missing the fact that we have to your point, the probably the most expensive natural disaster happening in not only California but almost in the whole country. I was looking at just average home values in uh, the Palisades. We're talking about $4 million homes as a median price, going up in flames. Over in the Eaton Canyon area, we're talking about $1 million
Mhm.
per home, and on average. And these are people who are paying $25,000 a year in property taxes, maybe $75,000 per year in
Probably
property.
more than that in
So I can,
California. They
yeah,
playing
you
big
would think
time.
if I'm paying $75,000 in property tax, you
Mhm.
best believe I think that there's going to be enough water to get up my hill, so we can kind of have adequate water pressure if there is a fire, or that the county and the city is working together. I don't have to be an expert in knowing where the county line ends and begins, where the city line ends and begins. I just I would think that I would have some reassurance that my leaders are prepared for at least something, and even if it's something beyond their preparation, are they moving in a judicious way?
Yeah. The mismanagement was clear. I mean, when I heard that the fire hydrants didn't have water, I didn't even think that was possible. Maybe I don't know how fire hydrants work. I thought they were tapped into the water line just like anything else.
Right.
I've never heard of a fire hydrant not having water. So
So, Justin, that goes back to the two things can be true, right? So, most of us just think, okay, the water hydrant has water. There you go.
Mhm.
But California is unique. I mean, we're talking about topography changes and water pumps that have to get a certain amount of
Sure.
water up into these hills. And people are in these hills for a reason because it's beautiful. And you got, in some places, you got the beach on one side, you got you have mountains and hills on one side. You can overlook the city, but
Mhm.
it's to have a city and have people there, it's going to take a lot of engineering and a lot of infrastructure.
Sure.
And just like most cities, the people are taking it to its limits, to its extremes. And so there is some nuance there. It's we should have had more water, but if you got fires raging on opposite sides of the county and water is just getting used at a level that they're not prepared for, absolutely going to have lower water
Yeah.
pressure.
And most city planners would tell you that Los Angeles just wasn't planned well, right? There's a lot of things that Los Angeles is very inefficient at because there wasn't great city planning. But let me bring this up because this became a major issue, and I want to when I talk about this, I want to tap into you as a businessman too, right?
Sure.
Because you have a business, you understand business, and so I want to tap into that a little bit. One of the major issues here is insurance.
Hmm.
A lot of the people who are really suffering don't know how they're going to rebuild their business or how they're going to rebuild their house because they couldn't get fire insurance or the fire insurance was taken away months before this happened, right?
That's right.
Now the argument to me, the obvious thing that most people say, and that's when what I heard is, hey man, you can't just take people's insurance away right before something like this happens. And that's my knee-jerk reaction. Like, this is really bad. How do you leave people without insurance? The counter argument is insurance is a business. Like it's
Yeah,
for profit.
that's
So
right.
I can't, as in somebody who's insuring people, if I own an insurance company and I have all these regulations saying how much I can charge people, I can't continue to do business and give people coverage if I know I'm going to go bankrupt and I wouldn't be able to cover all this damage anyway.
That's right.
That's the
That's
other
right.
side of the question. So, as a businessman, how do you kind of see this insurance debacle? Because that's exactly what it is at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking to a dentist that has kind of a strained relationship with insurances, so that's one thing. But also, but also, when it comes to this type of insurance, I mean, the we talked about the property values just as one element of insurance, right? We're talking about several billions of dollars that a company has to be prepared to pay out at all times, at any time, I should say, for an area that's high risk. And this is not unique to California. We have flood zones in other places in the country, places that are tornado zones. We just had, of
Florida's
course,
having issue.
hurricanes.
Yeah.
Yeah, hurricane areas. This is the same thing. And it oftentimes is because as humans, we're saying, hey, this is a beautiful place. We're going to stretch where we want to live and take the risk and then assume that a company should be there for us. And so we can't claim quote unquote free markets in one arena saying, hey, businesses can kind of choose da 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 da. And then if they choose to pull out for business purposes, now it's stuck to what's the state going to do about it? You know,
Yeah.
and that's what happened. I think California actually does have some type of like fire plan that you can get through the state, but it's extremely expensive and arduous. And then it gets back to the age old conversation about how much do you make public and how much do you make private, right? Because public
What's the
tends to
role
be
of
more
government?
inefficient and private
Yeah.
is more efficient. Well, that costs. So there are no easy answers here. I think it is an idea that we have to think if we choose to live in a certain place based on the things that we like about it, maybe it's the sunshine and maybe it's all of the things that we love, there are costs. There are hidden costs in everything.
No,
And some of
absolutely,
that
man.
means not being able to get proper insurance.
Yeah. So this is tough. I mean, unless they come up with a whole completely different model of how to insure people, and the state would have to play a major role in that, it's just gonna be hard to rebuild this in general, right?
Yeah.
So why rebuild something when the same thing can happen and you can't get any insurance? I pray that they figure it out. I think they can figure it out, but something has to give, something
But
has
what
to
what
change
do we
because this
know
isn't
about our
working.
country, right? When something is too big and too powerful and it fails, we kind of have it under the too big to fail category. The country will come through with federal dollars and things will happen and it'll be some unique thing. And then of course you have other people who are eager to replan out infrastructure for these parts of California, and they will use this tragedy as a opportunity.
Yeah.
But I think as people of faith, I think there's something huge here that I think we miss, and that is that this world is temporary. This material, we have to make sure we have to have compassion for folks who are going through very difficult times. We should all be looking for opportunities to help lay by in store, so to speak, and just ask for God's wisdom to be able to provide monetary help or physical help, prayers, of course, but also just a reminder that all this is physical. Our homes can be, any of us can have a situation where a home can be gone, our business can be gone, our lives can be gone. And so it is a humble reminder that, you know, life is more than the material, life is more than the physical.
Yeah, and we can use this opportunity to call people to give, to
That's
think
right.
about the people who are suffering right now and consider giving right now because they need it more than ever. I want to give a shout out to those churches who are already getting going. I've seen so many denominations and churches sending things out saying, hey, this is what we're doing. I know Kojic denomination came out and did. I think I saw something from National Baptist.
That's right.
Folks are paying attention and they're trying to help. And the church, again, gets a lot of criticism. But one of the first groups to pop in and really start helping people is going to be the church. And I hope it remains to be that way. We will be right back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
Let me start this with a quote, Jaha. You may have heard this before. Trump is a wannabe dictator running around trying to punish his enemies. President Barack Obama was sitting next to Donald Trump at President Jimmy Carter's funeral last week. What was that? I think it was last Friday.
That's right.
He was seen talking to Trump. Usually you talk to somebody who's sitting next to you. And even at one point, he apparently laughed at one of Trump's jokes. And people are really up in arms about it. I want to start this segment off. I want you to listen to what Charlemagne the God had to say about that instance. Check it out.
Politics is all WWE. And, meanwhile, we out here, cutting off family and friends and business relationships because of who somebody chose to vote for. Like, stop running to kick that football, man. Cut it out. Politics is all WWE. It's really just that simple for me.
They really could have been talking about the NFL. They could have been talking about anything.
Yeah, but after you went so hard, calling somebody a threat to democracy and calling somebody a fascist, and now you just, chummy with the man. You told us he was a threat to democracy. To me, that's just terrible political optics.
It's WWE because they sit next to each other. They could have said anything. Trump could have said, "You smell that?" Somebody farted, and he could have laughed. Like you just never know.
They was calling him a fascist, just like his VP called him Hitler. Would you giggle with Hitler?
Okay, my man didn't hold anything back, did he? He said it's all WWE, and y'all got us cutting off friends and family, and because of who they voted for, and y'all sitting there, as some of my friends would say, kikiing together at an event. I'm gonna tell you what I generally take from this very quickly, and I'm gonna pass it to you, man. I gave you the quote earlier. We know that Obama has called Trump a fascist. He said that he was a real threat to democracy, and a lot of people agree with that. I think he is a threat to democracy. But I'll be honest, I personally wasn't surprised or upset by what I saw. Although I do think there a threat exists to how our democracy operates under Trump to some extent. I don't believe that most Democratic leaders really believed that Trump was actually a Nazi and some of the things that they were saying before. And if there's any proof of that, I think it's right here. Right? I think this is proof. If he's Hitler, if he's really a pure fascist, you really don't sit there and laugh and joke with him. I mean, the country's about to go up in flames, according to what we're saying. There's really nothing to laugh about at that point, right? I never thought they really believed it. The sad thing was a lot of people out there listening to us, a lot of people we know, completely believed it. And
Right.
so when you completely believe, and politicians, there's some cosplay that goes into being a politician. I don't think they were completely unserious when they said he had some dictatorial traits and things of that nature, but did they really believe everything was ending and he was a Nazi? I don't think that they did. The bad part about it is they made a lot of people believe that, and now
Right.
people are confused by what's going on. What's your
Right.
take on this?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts about it. When I saw the clip, I did not have a reaction similar to what I've been seeing online. I didn't have that reaction. I thought that it was two former presidents who are seated in a way that they have to based on protocol at a state funeral. It's not like they were not talking or being in the same space behind the scenes, and now they come out in a very orchestrated way. They know the cameras are on them. They probably figured we might as well just sit here and be relatively friendly, or else we're just sitting there staring at spaces if we're not sitting next to one another. And in politics, it is very common for political enemies to be kind to one another in public, meanwhile, completely trying to destroy one another in every other regard. So nothing struck me as strange. I think one thing that is missing is that we are at a funeral. This is President Jimmy Carter's memorial service, state funeral, if I'm using the proper terms. I think one way to honor the man would be to have just a baseline kindness to somebody who is your enemy. And I think that would be a great testament to Jimmy Carter as a humanitarian.
Yeah.
And I think that gets lost. It's about Trump and Obama, and we forget that the context of the conversation is a funeral for President Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, I mean, this was a celebration of life. I suppose President Barack Obama could have been petty, acted like he didn't hear him when he's talking directly in his ear. He could have done that. I don't know exactly why he would. I wouldn't expect him to do that.
Yeah.
And if he said something that actually was funny, I understand laughing at it. I think people, Charlemagne says you're a phony, you're all that. I don't take it that way because it within this context, as you pointed out, I think it is understandable. Now, earlier in the week, there was, or maybe it was the week before, there was a video of one of the senators' husbands. So a senator was getting sworn in, her husband was holding the Bible, and Vice President Harris tried to shake his hand, tried to talk to him. He said nothing and did not shake her hand at all.
That's right.
I thought that was petty.
Yeah.
A lot of people thought that was petty. But the same people that thought that was petty don't understand why President Obama didn't act the same way to another sitting president. And here's what people got to accept. Whether you like it or not, Trump is the president. He's the president of the United States.
Yep.
if you live here, technically he's your president. What is Barack Obama going to accomplish by not speaking to him and acting like he can't have a sense of humor at the time? There's nothing to be gained. I think we're fighting against something that's already gone.
Yeah.
Right. So I see from an outsider's perspective, from somebody who took all the things that these politicians said seriously, which I told people, stop taking everything that these people are saying seriously. Doesn't mean every politician's insincere, but when you get to the end of a campaign, a lot of things are said that people might not necessarily mean or that are overstatements.
True. Also,
and now we're upset because he laughed and had a conversation with him. That I think we misled ourselves and had unrealistic expectations of what was actually going on.
I'll interject one thing. As followers of Christ, everybody is kind of like, speaking of agendas, everybody's kind of commenting based on their view of the world. And as followers of Christ, I think this is an opportunity for us to say, hey, we follow a God that says, love your enemies. And it's hard to love your enemies if there's no interaction with your enemies. It doesn't mean I have to be friends with them, but just as a baseline principle or concept to wrap our heads around, I think it's important for us to add that to the narrative that's out there, because if we choose to just stay silent about it, then all you're going to hear is Republican versus Democrat banter or worldview, or rich versus poor worldview, or black versus white worldview. I think it is up to us to say, hey, I don't have an issue with this based on this principle. I see it as an opportunity for us to enter the discourse. So for folks listening out there, I think it's an opportunity to introduce Christ.
And I think it's an opportunity not to value performance so highly.
Sure.
I think what some people would have liked to see is him treat President Trump like Will Smith did Chris Rock, right? Like that's what we want. We want to see a disrespectful. We want to see you disrespect him so we feel better.
Yeah. And
but it really would have accomplished nothing. Guess what?
Clicks.
I can guarantee you this whole presidency, Obama, when it comes, if there's a chance for him to do something that goes against Trump and it's going to help the people, he's going to do that. So what does him acting petty in front of the camera do when they have disagreements and he's going to try to get him out of office in the next 4 years? That's what people should be concerned about. But we like a lot of performance when it really often is in vain. Now, let me ask you this question.
Sure.
The conversation about fascism, okay? Is Trump really a fascist? And it's interesting for me to be talking about this now because I'm actually watching, I don't know if you've seen or listened to the podcast, Real Dictators. Now, Real Dictators is a podcast, and right now the series is focused on Benito Mussolini from Italy. So me and my oldest son have been listening to that. Is Trump a fascist? If what we mean by fascist, this is my take. If what we mean by fascist is he doesn't have enough respect for the Constitution and is threatening to retaliate against his enemies, then okay. If that's what we mean by fascist. But what I would want to impress upon people, because I know most people don't even know the definition of fascist. What I want to impress upon people is the true definition, the technical definition of fascist is much more specific. It's much more ideological. And the truth of the matter is, whether you like Trump or not, and this ain't a defense of him, whether you like Trump or not, he's not ideological. So when you're talking about a technical definition of fascism, you're talking about anti-individualism. Is Trump really anti-individual? I can't say that he is.
Well,
you're talking about militarism.
Yeah.
I mean, he kind of ran on getting us out of war. So even if you don't like him, even if you don't like his foreign policy, it's hard to say he's more militaristic than what we already had. Here's something else. Usually when you think of a dictator, you're talking about somebody who's very regimented. Trump doesn't seem very regimented to me. And you're also talking about somebody who's completely controlling people's lives. Trump wants to get his way. Does he want to control the lives and the culture of everybody in America? I don't think so. So I don't think it reaches a technical definition, but go ahead. I want to hear what you think.
I think that I think it's important that you are bringing up the technical definition of the words that we use and the words that are thrown around. But I get the sense that people don't really care much about the word. It's about the feeling. It's the
The
idea
vibe.
that this
The vibe.
guy is a little scary and his followers don't seem to follow any type of rules and regulations and even their own uh, things that matter to them most, right? All those things can kind of go out of the window because the vibe can shift. It's almost like a cultish personality. It's a church of Trump. It's this American nationalism kind of blend of this religious fervor with power of political party. And I think to the average person, they really don't care what it's called. And they don't even have to know, is it technically fascism or technically this or that? All they know is the vibes seem really scary. Like, I don't know where people are. Like, people, like, I know conservatives that are like, they've been conservative about the issues and policies. And then all of a sudden, some of those things went out of the window because it was about the person, not the conservativeness. And it's not just one side of the aisle. I think we all, the Republicans, Democrats, Independents, we can get caught up with these rock stars, right? And just kind of co-sign everything that they do. But I think that that's where folks have some concern. And I'm in that camp of having those kind of concerns. And I may not know exactly the word to call it, but I do know something seems off when the goalpost is changing. All kind of things are all over the place, and it's a concern there.
Yeah, no, we can certainly agree that there are many things to be concerned about. In fact, we could have a whole podcast episode or series of podcast episodes talking about all the things that we're concerned with when it comes to the Trump administration. So I meet you there.
Yeah.
I still think that it's problematic when we are lazy with our words.
Yeah.
One thing I do know is especially some of the Democratic leaders that are calling him a fascist, they know what the word means. They know it's a technical term, ideological term, and it sounds good and spreads. And even if people don't know what to call it, so they just lean on that, there's probably a word to describe what you were just saying. Or maybe we need to make a term to describe what you're saying. Words have to matter. How we use words have to matter. Because guess what? What if somebody comes up that really is a fascist?
Yeah.
And again, saying Trump is not a fascist is not to say he's good. It's saying fascism is something specific. And when we call somebody, and it's something throughout the world that has terrorized people.
Yeah.
It's been
it's a loaded term, right? It's a loaded term.
Some of the worst dictators in the world, some of the worst leaders in the world were fascist dictators, and we know how some of those stories went. So that's all I'm saying. I get that some people don't care. That's probably the problem. I think we need to find words words matter, and we need to find terms that actually fit what we're talking about, especially when you're talking about a leader in this moment, because those words are used often because they scare people. And I think we need to be a little more precise in how we describe people in these instances where people don't know what's going to happen.
That's right. That's a good point.
So anyway, man, as always, great to have you on. Definitely going to have you on again, brother. I hope everything is going well with you. Anything you want to say to the people before you head out?
Man, I'm just thankful for the opportunity to have these conversations. I'm always a listener, so it's nice to jump on. And for everybody listening out, I just pray that we keep that faith filter, that faith lens. And we're in the world, but not of the world. It's good to know what's going on with politics, but not let it give us anxiety that kind of strikes at our faith at God. So we have to know that God got it. He got it. And as crazy and as horrible as things can be, or as good as things can be, God has it under control. And let's just do the best we can and be good stewards with what he's given us.
God's got it. Thanks again, brother. Well, Ann Camp, there is a cross that neither political conservatism nor progressivism is fit to bear. There's a civic hearing in need of faithful witnesses who love social justice and won't surrender the truth to be loved by the world. Politic with the boldness and compassion of Jesus Christ. Until next time, Ann Camp, I'll holla at you.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian.
in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.